anything else we can say about Yemen's stance here in terms of its readiness, the kind of like regional tension, 4 weeks into this so-called ceasefire. We do need another word for it, by the way. Meanwhile, Israel is continuing to bomb Lebanon. We're seeing what's happening in the West Bank. There are more like ridiculously crazy political developments between the Western installed puppet regime in Syria and Israel. I mean, so Yemen is ready. What does that? What's the significance of this? What should we be watching?
I mean, when you look at events today in Lebanon, which also sure don't look like a ceasefire, they look like an invasion.
Yeah,
Um, this ceasefire doesn't feel very secure in the way that it's set up. I don't want to make
yeah,
predictions because events will take care of themselves, but it's clear that the fighting groups are not destroyed. They are ready to fight. Palestinians in Gaza have clearly not surrendered. Nobody has in Gaza. It seems like a lot of this ceasefire, which I think we'll talk about coming up more, it's taking place in other countries besides Israel and
yeah,
Gaza, um, and the people who are ostensibly supposed to be mediating on behalf of the Palestinians don't seem to have the best interests of Gaza in mind in this ceasefire. I think that's fair to say.
yeah,
What we've seen already from Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt, although Egypt did manage to get in some heavy equipment, the reason for the heavy equipment was to find Israelis. It wasn't to
yeah,
find Palestinians, and they were able to get those kind of heavy diggers in when it was looking for Israelis. Hopefully, those diggers will come in much bigger numbers from
yeah.
Egypt in the coming days to find the more than 10,000 Palestinians that are still in the rubble.
Mm. Thank you for that. Ali, let's turn to more wider regional developments. What something?
Very, very wide. If
Yeah,
we're going to talk about the region, I mean, there's a few things sort of following up from what John just said, and one is a piece of breaking news that came up while we're on air. A new country is to join the so-called Abraham Accords, and guess who it is? There was some speculation it would be Saudi Arabia or some other Arab country. Well, it's Kazakhstan, very far from the region, and a country that has never been at war with Israel, never been involved in the Palestinian-Israeli issue. In fact, if you even read this Axios article by uh, Barak Ravid, which is the scoop breaking this news. And apparently, there's going to be a big announcement at the White House later today. Well, it points out this small detail that Kazakhstan and Israel have had full diplomatic relations for more than 30 years. So, this is the definition of a nothing burger. Just reminding
yeah,
people the Abraham Accords the series of so-called peace deals that the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, brokered back in 2020, which created formal peace agreements between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Bahrain, and uh, Morocco as well, and some sort of semi-formal arrangements with other countries like Oman and Saudi Arabia, which were expected to sign on as full partners. None of these countries have ever been at war with Israel. But the idea here is that it's all about sidelining the Palestinians. It's all about saying, look, the reason there's no peace is because countries haven't recognized Israel. So let's get these countries to recognize Israel. And it's supposed to have symbolic value for Israel in the sense of saying, oh, look, another Muslim country signed a peace treaty
Right.
with Israel. What I think this shows us is really the fact that they're actually trying to pass this off as something, that Kazakhstan, a country that has had close ties with Israel for decades, is joining the Abraham Accords, really shows that they have failed even to convince loyal vassals of the United States, like the Saudis, like some of the other countries, to sign up. That they cannot get any more Arab countries to join this, uh, is why they've gone to this sort of desperate PR stunt of saying, I don't even understand what it is Kazakhstan is supposedly joining, because the
Exactly.
UAE, the fanfare with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain is, we didn't have diplomatic relations before, now we have them. We're opening embassies, we're exchanging ambassadors, we're setting up flights. All that already existed between Israel and Kazakhstan. So what are they even joining here?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the pretense of the Abraham Accords has always been that it's a kind of peace accord. There's sort of peace in the Middle East, but most of these countries have never been at any kind of war with Israel anyway. And Kazakhstan has a border with China, for goodness sake. I mean, that's how far removed it is from West Asia.
Yeah. Well, we will continue to monitor those I mean, it's absolutely absurd.
Monitor, yeah.
What they try to pass off as something that should interest anybody, it's pathetic.
The Abraham Accords runs contrary to what is trying to be accomplished in Gaza. The two things can't happen at once. You can't have a foreign occupation and a regional peace deal with Israeli troops in 50% of Gaza, the borders sealed. So the fact that they're even trying to tie these together just seems, yeah, it just seems like it's the previous Trump administration's pet project, and they're
Yeah.
trying to, because the thing that it does is it's an economic deal between those countries, to expand Israel's markets from the countries that would previously boycotted Israel.
Right.
So when you don't have any resolution in Gaza, you're not going to have the Saudis sign on, which was mostly the whole point of the Abraham Accords.
Well,
So,
I
yeah.
think the reason for doing this, John, is precisely because they've made no progress in the so-called Trump peace plan for Gaza. And so one thing I wanted to do is just, again, we want to keep tracking and following what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, which is the attempt to move to so-called phase two. Again, as we've pointed out repeatedly, what the resistance agreed to was only phase one of this Trump plan, which was exchanging prisoners and exchanging bodies of those who had died either in Israeli custody, a much larger number of Palestinian bodies, for the relatively small number of Israeli bodies still in Gaza. And of course, humanitarian aid, which, as we've seen from Nora's report and throughout, is still not coming in anything close to the quantities needed. Phase two is supposed to be moving towards demilitarization and disarmament of the resistance, which, again, we have to stress the resistance has not signed up to. All of that is supposed to be negotiated. But what all this hinges on is bringing in this so-called International Stabilization Force. And as we've been reporting over the past few weeks, the US has been struggling to figure out a formula that anyone can sign up to because of the total lack of clarity about what this force is supposed to do. Is it a peacekeeping force, or are they supposed to go in like Israel wants and fight Hamas as proxies of Israel to get Arab armies or to get Azerbaijan or to get Indonesia to come in and fight Hamas and defeat Hamas in the way the vaunted Israeli army couldn't? So the latest development here is this story that's coming out in the past couple of days we can show this headline from the New York Times, that the US seeks a 2-year UN mandate for a Gaza Stabilization Force. And according to the New York Times, according to a draft resolution put forward by the US, seen by the New York Times, the force would work with Israel and Egypt to ensure the process of demilitarizing Gaza, including the permanent decommissioning of weapons from armed groups. It would also train and support Palestinian police personnel, protect civilians, and work to secure humanitarian corridors. So again, this is what we've talked about in the past. Now it's attempting to put the stamp of UN legitimacy on a force that is designed to collaborate with Israel and achieve the goals Israel failed to achieve for itself. But what the New York Times acknowledges has been the case since the start of this, quote, it was not clear how the international force would ensure that Gaza is demilitarized. Hamas has long regarded giving up all its weapons as tantamount to surrender, with armed struggle against Israel a crucial part of its ideology. That's the New York Times' spin. In fact, armed
Right. It's
struggle
an ideology, right? Yeah.
armed struggle isn't a crucial part of Hamas's ideology. They've said that we are willing to end armed struggle as soon as there is a viable political alternative, but
Right.
that has not happened at all. And then they say, and this is significant, a UN Security Council mandate is seen as necessary to persuade many countries to consider sending troops to Gaza. The deployment of international troops could reinforce the fragile ceasefire in Gaza and reduce the likelihood of renewed confrontation between Israel and Hamas, analysts say. And then I think this quote gets to the crux of it. We hope it is peacekeeping, King Abdullah of Jordan said in a BBC interview aired last week, referring to the purpose of the force. Quote, because if it is peace enforcing, nobody will want to touch that. Peacekeeping is that you're sitting there supporting the local peace force, the Palestinians. End quote. Of course, peace enforcing means actually going out and trying to forcibly disarm Hamas or the resistance, which King Abdullah appears to be saying nobody's willing to do that. And of course, as we said last week, nobody is willing and nobody is capable of doing it. Israel couldn't do it. So this is all to say that they are no further towards putting together a viable plan for what this so-called second phase would look like, a second phase that nobody has negotiated or agreed to, but they're acting as if Hamas has agreed, in fact, to surrender its weapons, which they haven't. The only other element I'll add to this, again, more reporting from Axios, but summarized here by Dropsite News. They did a good job summarizing this in one of their posts on Twitter, so I'm just referring to that, where they say that the US and Palestinian diplomats, by that they mean Palestinian Authority diplomats, held rare talks at the UN over Washington's draft resolution. And they say that UN ambassador, that's the US representative, Mike Waltz, met with diplomats from the Palestinian Authority in New York on Tuesday to discuss Washington's draft UN Security Council resolution creating an international stabilization force for Gaza, the first direct engagement between the US and the PA on Gaza's post-war governance, Axios reports. And they say the PA diplomats reportedly welcomed the framework, but urged that the PA given a more immediate role in Gaza rather than a delayed one. And then they say many Arab and European governments back the idea of a reformed PA overseeing Gaza as a precondition for supporting the US plan. France and the UK have pressed Washington to expand the PA's role. So again, summarizing what's going on here, remember, the Palestinian Authority works with Israel, with the Israeli military, against the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance. So, of course, the Palestinian Authority would welcome a plan which would sort of give a UN stamp of legitimacy to outlawing the Palestinian resistance, because it's long been a goal of the Palestinian Authority working on behalf of Israel to disarm the Palestinian resistance and make sure that Palestinians have no way to defend themselves against Israel's attacks, whether in the West Bank or Gaza, and no way to exercise their legitimate right to resistance. The PA wants Palestinians to be completely naked and disarmed in front of Israel. And they call this the one authority, the one gun policy, the idea that we, the Palestinian Authority, are the true Palestinian government, and we're the only ones who should have guns. Well, yeah, but you only use your guns to serve Israel. So that's why lots of Palestinians believe that they have the right to bear arms, to borrow the words of the US Constitution, to exercise their internationally recognized right to self-defense and resistance. What this Security Council resolution threatens is giving the veneer of UN legitimacy and the force of international law to this idea that the Palestinian resistance is illegal and criminal and has to be disarmed. And that's a very dangerous idea. It's, of course, no surprise that the Palestinian Authority that exists to serve Israel and fight Palestinians would be supporting this draft and saying, our only problem with it is it doesn't give us collaborators an even bigger role in this plan to delegitimize and disarm Palestinian resistance on behalf of Israel. We, the PA, would like to have, we, the collaborators of Israel, would like to have a bigger role in this scheme. So that's Ali Abu Ni'ma's translation of what is going on into plain language. And
I mean,
of my-
I just want to say also, I mean, it really is interesting that they are trying to use the UN in this way.
yeah, the US loves the UN. They think
all
it's
of a
great.
sudden,
Yeah.
and assuming that the UN would enforce some sort of scheme like this when it has allowed Israel to carry out a genocide in full view. You know, there's been condemnations, there's been resolutions, but again, the US veto power and Israel's veto power has given the UN absolutely no teeth to stop this genocide. And now they're, you know, and they've and making, you know, whatever international humanitarian law is making it completely meaningless. And now they're talking about using the UN to enforce this, you know, collaborationist
As
plan.
they did, you know, the US always has done. They used the
Yeah.
UN to legitimize their aggression against many
Right.
countries.
Yeah.
But they're being pushed into this position by the mediators, by Turkey and Qatar, who want to have some kind of mechanism that's not just the Trump mechanism
Yeah.
to oversee this ceasefire, and which is why they're not in support of Palestinians in their negotiations here, because this is a
It's
disaster.
about putting a UN cover on everyone's dirty role
Right.
in this. It's
Well,
about
because they
putting,
can't recruit enough soldiers. So the only way that they can get
Mhm.
soldiers to join Kushner's back of the napkin at a golf game idea is to do it this way through the UN, because the countries that are going to send troops need to have, according to their own individual constitutions, have to have a UN mandate. So this isn't something the US wanted. Trump wanted it to be entirely done through the Board of Peace. This is the first mention of the United Nations at all. And this would be
Yeah.
a moment if the Qataris and the Turks were on side with the Palestinians, where they would be stepping in, but they're not. They're actually the ones who are pushing for this.
Yeah.
Because I see this UN security force as a deeply problematic for a number of reasons, but including fundamental Palestinian sovereignty.
And that's what it's designed to be. Of course, in even in the best, even in its most benign form, it's designed to impose a collaborationist rule on Gaza. But as long as they haven't, again, what this boils down to, the unspoken thing in this New York Times article or in Axios, is that Israel failed to defeat Hamas. And so you really can't go into Gaza. You either have to go in and fight Hamas, or you have to go in with their agreement.
Yeah.
And that's the circle that they failed to square. The one final point I want to make on this, others may have observations, is that in this Axios article, or the drop site summary of it, it says American officials believe Russia and China may seek changes, but are unlikely to veto the resolution. And sadly, I think that is a fair assessment. And so this sort of multipolar world, or this geopolitical change where we want to see other major powers standing up for fundamental rights of colonized people, is not here yet. And one of the points here is that both Russia and China still deal with the Palestinian Authority as if it represents Palestinians. They recognize it as the so-called state of Palestine, and they deal with it that way. So if the PA goes to them and says, yes, we support this resolution, who are Russia and China to say, no? They're going to say, we're not going to be more Catholic than the Pope in this situation. So if the PA is supportive of it, then maybe we'll abstain, but we're not going to veto it. I certainly wish that that was not the case. Of course, again, this is still American spin, but sadly, nothing I've seen over the last 2 years suggests that they would take a more forceful stance than that. And that could end up with them legislating this fundamentally anti-Palestinian and pro-colonial scheme into a UN Security resolution, a UN Security Council resolution, which they will all claim is binding.
Right.
Now, remember this, that under the Biden administration, when the Biden finally allowed the Security Council resolution to pass, calling for an immediate ceasefire, the Biden administration, the good guys, not Trump, not big old mean orange Trump, but the Biden administration said, oh, it's not binding. It's just it's not binding. Well, they'll all be insisting that this one is binding, right, when it comes to any demands for demilitarization of the resistance or surrendering weapons while the occupier is still in Gaza, still perpetrating genocide, still controlling the borders of Gaza.
And still hoarding weapons from the US and Germany.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
All of these
so
places.
It's really, it's quite troubling. But remember, but they still haven't squared the circle, and they still haven't figured out how to get around this big fact that Israel, with all their support over 2 years, failed to defeat Hamas. But sadly, as I said last week and the week before, the way they're going to handle this is by continuing to starve and punish the population in Gaza. And that's the thing we have to, they realized, like, bombs, that's bad because, more bombs, they're still bombing. But what they don't want is the images of shredded babies on everyone's phones. It's much harder to illustrate a genocide when it's being done by starvation, by freezing people to death, by depriving them of medicine when people are dying of heart attacks and strokes and fatigue and weak immune systems and all the other things that don't even get counted in the casualty statistics. So that's what they've moved to. That's their primary weapon now to continue this genocide.
Ali, the comments you made earlier about the Palestinian Authority and how it has and still wants to establish a single gun, a single hand of violence, reminded me of the comments of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 that were leaked in the Palestine papers, which I know you reported on a lot at the time. And
this is back in 2011.
Yeah, that it came out, and I was just looking up his his comments. And what Saeb Erekat, of course, was the Palestinian Authority's chief negotiator at the time, and in a 2009 meeting with the US envoy, Middle East envoy at the time, he said, "We have had to kill Palestinians to establish one authority, one gun, and the rule of law. We continue to perform our obligations. We have invested time and effort and killed our own people to maintain order and the rule of law." So that's what he was saying privately at the time, being very candid, and that is still the way the Palestinian Authority
Well, this
operates.
whole idea of the one authority, the one gun, actually it goes back to the German or Prussian sociologist Max Weber, who said that, famously said that what defines a state is that it has a monopoly on violence, that the state is the only body that is allowed to use violence. And that's where that comes from. And that's what they're trying to sort of use here to legitimate this anti-resistance position, that only the state, only the central government should carry weapons. And they're using the same reasoning in Lebanon too. But the problem is, well, in Palestine, there is no state. There's a Palestinian, there is no Palestinian state. It's a make-believe, it's a fiction. No matter whether or not Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron recognize this imaginary Palestinian state, it doesn't exist. And so when they talk about the Palestinian Authority having a monopoly on violence, they're actually talking about anti-Palestinian collaborators having a monopoly on violence. So it's the perverse opposite of what Max Weber was actually talking about. And they're using the same thing in Lebanon. But of course, a state loses that monopoly on violence once the state no longer has the capacity to defend its sovereignty, territory, or its people. And that's when resistance becomes legitimate in international law. And I've talked about this in the past. The Constitution of Sweden. I'm taking Sweden because, we're always told how advanced and civilized the Nordic countries are. And, they're always the highest on the Human Development Index in the UN and so on. Well, go and read the Constitution of Sweden. It says that if Sweden falls under foreign occupation, it becomes the duty of all state officials to support the resistance. It's in the Swedish Constitution. So what the Swedish Constitution is codifying there is this principle that once the state loses its capacity to exercise and defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, then the right of the people to resistance comes into play. And of course, this is also reflected in international law. And so Lebanon, as a country which is unwilling or incapable of defending itself against Israeli aggression and occupation, the right of resistance comes into play. And the same is true in Palestine. When Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron recognize the state of Palestine, what should actually happen is they should say the following. If they want to be in compliance with international law, they should say, we recognize the state of Palestine. However, the state of Palestine is under occupation. The authorities in the state of Palestine, which we recognize, have no capacity to exercise their sovereignty and defend their borders against this foreign occupation. Therefore, we support the resistance. And we're going to send weapons and support to the resistance in Palestine. Not training collaborators, which is what they do, what they want to do.
And not arming and funding the occupiers and continuing to take their side every single time when it comes to facts on the ground. It's I don't know. It makes your head spin. Finally, we just have one more topic to discuss, and then we'll close out. But Ali, what can you say about a journalist who was fired in Europe.
Yeah, let's play this clip that we played a couple of weeks ago, and we'll talk about it.
Repeating several times that Russia should repay for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Do you believe Israel should repay for the reconstruction of Gaza, since they have destroyed almost all the strip and the civilian infrastructures? Thank you.
That was the
definitely an interesting
we
question,
can cut
which
it there.
I would.
Yeah, the answer was not interesting. The question was what was interesting. That was Italian journalist Gabriele Nunziati, a Brussels-based reporter for Rome's Nova news agency. And The Intercept is reporting that after he asked that question a few weeks ago, and that was at the regular press briefing of the European Union in Brussels, after he asked that perfectly reasonable question about, does the EU expect Israel to pay for the damage it did in Gaza, just as the EU demands that Russia pay for damage it's done in Ukraine? And the EU's answer was, "Oh, we didn't think about that. What an interesting question." Well, according to The Intercept, Gabriele Nunziati told The Intercept he received a notice that he would lose his job barely a month after he became a correspondent. "I received an email from my news agency telling me that they intended to stop our collaboration. The move, which was first reported by the Italian news website Fan Page, came after he asked Paolo Pino, the European Commission's chief spokesperson, about Gaza's reconstruction on October 13th, referring specifically to that question." So European mainstream media do not want journalists who ask questions. They want journalists who are stenographers who write down what the EU and other officials say and faithfully regurgitate it. So another very disturbing sign of the tightening regime of censorship that we all live under.
Journalist fired for doing journalism.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly.
that's how it is now. You know, thank the universe that that we have this platform where we can do actual journalism. And that's only because we are accountable to the people and the truth and facts and context. And yeah, that's why we exist. That's why we've been around now for 25 years.